This program is brought to you by the Merdeka Award.
Hello and welcome to the Merdeka Award Roundtable. Today the topic of our discussion is the Spirit of Merdeka, nurturing visionaries. That's right, when we talk about visionaries, we're talking about leaders like Tengku Abdul Rahman, Tun Tan Cheng Lock, Tun Viti Sambandhan, men of principle, men of integrity, men of courage, men who acted without fear or favor to do the right thing, to get independence for this country. These men were deeply committed to their own communities, and yet they were also driven by a higher purpose, that is unity and to achieve independence. They succeeded because they had the passion, they had the belief, they had the integrity, and they shared a common dream, a common goal, and that's what drew them all together. Today, when we look at the Spirit of Merdeka and we question ourselves, when we want to strive for excellence, is this about recapturing the Spirit of Merdeka that we had in 57 or 63, depending on how you look at it? Is this about a Spirit of Merdeka in the context, a reinterpretation, if you like, in the context of here and now? Or is it a new Spirit of Merdeka that we must foresee for the future? Well, that's the question, and I'm not going to be the one answering it. We've assembled here today some panelists. Let's begin with the lovely writer and social commentator, Dina Zaman. Hi, Dina. Welcome. And we also have Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dr. Khoo Kim from the History Department, University Malaya. Thank you, Tan Sri. We're also joined by Professor Harith Ahmad, who is from the Physics Department, University of Malaya. And although he's being rather modest today, I have to say that he is actually one of the past recipients of the Merdeka Award. We are also joined by Medan Abdullah, and he's the Secretary to the Board of Trustees for the Merdeka Award. And rounding off this panel is Mr. Tharuma Rajah, who is the Managing Director of the Hay Group. All right, lady, gentlemen, the Merdeka Award talks about independence as being more than just national sovereignty. It talks about it being the liberation of the mind and the spirit, and only then can one pursue excellence. What are your own thoughts on what independence is? Let's start with you, Dina. What's independence to you? You, today on this panel, you represent the post-Merdeka generation, so you know, we'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
I think if you want to talk about my generation and the younger ones, there are some of us who are very politically inclined, and there's a lot more who have absolutely no clue about our history, our heritage, our legacy. And I think that from my work, when I talk to young people, people my age, I feel that we are actually right now suffering from an identity crisis. There's a lot of things that we discuss, we talk about, and when you read blogs, forums, even newspapers, comments, and when meet my readers, well, you have one, the generation, like my father's generation would say, you know, what's happened to our country? We fought so much, it was supposed to be brilliant, and look at what's happening now. My generation, we're all very invigorated by civil society, the fact that we can say what we want now. And you have another segment of society that says, you know, we don't really care. We just want to get a job. We want to have an easy life. Why must we be bothered about this? But a lot of us don't realize how politics does influence our lives, and that we have the power to change things. I'm not saying that we are anti-government. No, please don't get me wrong. I believe that we can work and negotiate. It's just that we're still very young. We don't have the tools and the skills to negotiate with the powers that be and civil society. We're still clashing. That gap there has not been addressed. So while that is being addressed, I think right now we're still searching for what it means to be Malaysian and what it means to, you know, to appreciate Merdeka.
To appreciate Merdeka more than just being a national holiday.
Yeah.
All right. Let's come to you, Tan Sri. You've had a chance to really look at this, and from a historical perspective as well. What is independence to you?
I usually don't like to use the word independence. I look at Malaysia, and before this, Malaya, as a nation state. A state which was very much in the minds of the people here, even when it did not officially exist. Most people don't realize that before 1957, there was no Malaya as a nation state. But our people, nevertheless, used the term. For example, the first group to use the term Malaya were the tennis players. So the Malayan Lawn Tennis Association was born in 1921.
Right.
Far away from 1957. There were others, and by 1956, we were not yet a nation state, but we were in the Olympic Games in Melbourne. Earlier, in 1949, we emerged as world champion in badminton.
Yes.
Again, Malaya. But Malaya was non-existent. So to me, of that generation, Malaya already made a lot of sense.
So it was a state of the mind, because there was no actual state, if you like, a known actual nation.
But to us, Malaya was real nevertheless.
Right.
Whereas today, the young people don't seem to know anything about the country. Ask them anything about the country and they happily say, I don't know. And so they don't have that love for the country. And we try to say we must instill. How do you instill? Except by making them feel for the country. And to do that, Malaysia has to achieve something extraordinary internationally. History has shown that whenever we achieve something internationally, like winning the Thomas Cup, going to the Olympic Games, the people feel so proud. And in 1975, when we entered the semi-final of the World Cup in hockey, 50,000 Malayans turned up at the Merdeka Stadium. It was a world record for hockey, and they were so proud of the country. The Malayans like winners. So you must be able to compete, and actually Malaya has lots of reasons to be proud of itself. We have the best kept mangrove swamp in the country, in the world. We have the biggest flower in the world. We have the oldest tropical rainforest in the world. We have the biggest statue of sleeping Buddha in the whole of Southeast Asia, beating Thailand. All these things are not known to the younger generation, whereas they want to feel that this is a great country, and you have to inform them, then they will feel it.
All right, very quickly, Tharuma, you were talking about a rallying point. Is this what the problem is? People, have no concept of independence because of that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I speak myself. I'm a Merdeka boy, having born in 1957, and a rallying point. If I trace back my historical roots, I actually come from the kampong. When I grew up, I was blessed, or I was very fortunate in terms as there was a lot of rallying point in terms of icons or models I can look up to from leadership. See, I was growing up in an era of school. I was one of the last generation which had the English education. I went to a co-ed school which was a very multiracial, which really reflected one Malaysia. We had Malay boys, Chinese, Indians together. And the rallying point at that time, I really look at it, we had models of, when we come to school, the teachers were role models. They were, at that time, they were not graduate teachers, but they had the passion in terms of instilling in the afternoon about sports. They used to challenge us. Then I grew up in the village. One of the very interesting facet of fabric of the village life at that time, I grew up in a kampong. You had leadership at that point, that you have the religious imam and the Bilal, who was just my neighbor the other day. Then you look at it, you have the village sidang at that time. Then you have the wise man of the village, the orang tua kampong. So I was quite blessed and said, leadership was very inspiring at that time. There were no formal rules of regulation and kind of thing. Village life got on a very coordinated fashion. Conflict resolution was done in a manner, and there was even political leadership at that time. You look at Tunku Abdul Rahman, Tan Sri Swin, Tun Razak, when I was growing up, were leaders I want to emulate. You know, the integrity and the kind of things that really happened. And you had like intellectual, Royal Professor Unku Aziz at that time, and I looked up to you, read the papers. So for me, there was a lot of rallying call in terms of it. But now I look back into the context of that Merdeka spirit, context has changed. We must come to reality in terms of it. After 50 years, now we need to look at the next 50 years of what it means for Malaysians. Having traveled worldwide broad, I think Malaysia's diversity of Malays, Indian, Chinese today, we are now really tapping into the strengths of kind of thing. And come a common goal and say, today the world equilibrium is shifting towards the east. It's about China, India. Today you look at Malaysia is the largest Islamic sukuk bang. So I think one of the things about leadership, what can inspire around is that diversity. And we need to tap on and find common goals to see that new inspiring vision.
Well, perhaps we have to see ourselves as Malaysians, and rather than this almost, to a lot of people, almost artificial, because there's been such a mix now that, you know, people don't really want to see themselves as Chinese, Indian, Malay, or Dan Lain. They want to see themselves as Malaysians. We're going to go for a quick break right now. When we come back, we'll see, well, what has all this got to do with nurturing visionaries? So do stay with us. Hello and welcome back. You're watching the Merdeka Award Roundtable. We're talking about the Spirit of Merdeka, nurturing visionaries. Now, I posed the question before we went to break, and what's all this got to do with nurturing visionaries? And I think for that we have to come to you, Medan. The Merdeka Award is very particular. It looks at independence and says, you know, it's more than just sovereignty. It's about the liberation of the spirit. It's about the liberation of the mind. So I'm taking it that this award then looks for individuals, looks for people that do exactly that.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the Merdeka spirit, the idea is to recognize and reward Malaysians, individuals, organizations who have contributed to Malaysia. And it seeks to promote thought leadership and a culture of excellence and a worldview. So what we're doing today is, in the Merdeka Award, is to ensure that we focus on some of the elements that we think is important for the nation going forward. Okay, if I would like to quote something that what the late, our first Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman said, independence is indeed a milestone, but it's only the threshold to high endeavor. I call upon you to dedicate yourself to work and strive with hand and brain to create a new nation. So the expectation is that we build on what they have achieved in 1957. And what is important for us is what do we do now. Okay, we can look back to history and understand the lesson of history. We can look forward and understand what's the vision for tomorrow. The important thing, what do we do now? So we need to be focused on the issues that are important. We must do the right thing. We must make the right choices now. Because what we do today will influence what goes tomorrow. So that is the spirit behind this Merdeka Award. We want to recognize people who have demonstrated these qualities. And you'll be surprised that some of the winners, they're not really well known in the normal sense of the word. But if you look at what they have done, what they achieved, then you know they have done a lot of things for the nation. Even at the national level, even at the global level. So that is why we are very excited about this Merdeka Award, and we want people to discuss and talk about the right thing. That's our contribution to the Merdeka spirit.
Right, recognizing some of the thought leaders, because some of these people are not necessarily the ones who are going around banging a drum saying, look at me, exactly. But they're doing that. Well, let's talk to someone who's been there, who is there and living that life. Professor Harith, you know, it's amazing. You're known internationally, and yet, I do apologize if it sounds, if it offends, but there are very few people outside of, the circle of physics and sciences and all that really know that you know, they have someone in their own backyard who's achieved such wonderful and great things. But the question for you is that, how does one cultivate the kind of thinking that propels you to excellence? I mean, we've heard all the catchphrases, you know, paradigm shift, thinking out of the box, and so on and so forth, and yet you just went and did it. Was it as simple as that?
We are very new. In fact, if we look into the history of Malaysia, normally if you look in the early days, we are stronger in the arts field, like history, like Tan Sri Khoo Kay King, a very renowned historian. He did pose me a question. He did make a statement before we come to the show just now. He was saying that many Menteri Besar, Chief Minister are from the history department. He did ask me, where are all the physicists? There's no minister of that, no minister yet who are a physicist or a scientist. But you must bear in mind, science was started a bit late in this country. It's not 1954. Science started about 1970s, you know, where the emphasis was given to science stream, science education. So now we are taking pride of the advancement of science in this country. If you look the last couple of years, many scientific community, good doctors winning the Merdeka Award, and you find that people in other fields like chemistry winning Merdeka Award. So science people are slowly taking shape and winning many awards. And if you look into publication, in 1960s, in terms of publication, you hardly see any publication. Of course, we may have some good books by Tan Sri Khoo Kay King. This one exceptional figure. But on the general perspective, the number of publications that we get, book returns in the Malaysian community are very limited, are very small in number. So we do not fare very well in terms of publication as compared to advanced country. But in 1980s, you find that there is a rapid rise of publication in the scientific world, actually. So Malaysia has catch up in science field. I think in the year 2000, in the 21st century, I'm very sure Malaysian scientific community will play a bigger role in
What
the global.
caused that change? Was it a change in thinking that we said, we can do it too?
Yeah, because there is a need of science. Of course, I'm not saying that humanities or history are not important. It's a very simplistic thought, actually. But if you look what around here, the show that we have now, what make this show happen are due to the scientific breakthrough. Communication, you have lighting, you have camera, high definition camera, you have good microphone that does not need cable, wirelessly communicating. Those are all science. We should be grateful to the development of science and technology that makes our life better, actually. Of course, humanities are important, but science play a bigger role in life, actually. And this I want to touch just now about the, of course, Tan Sri was saying that there is no feeling among the young now, the youngster. I'm not young, but I think quite close to most of the panel here. But when I look at the young people, you have to be fair to them, you know. Even if you look into global, if you look into Japan, Japan is very patriotic nation. If you look at the Japanese in the 1960s, they would die for the country. But if you go to Japan nowadays, you look at the young, they don't want to work anymore. They will go for part-time, odd job. Japanese culture has changed. It's not as those days that you find in 20 years back, 30 years back. The youth throughout the world, the mindset has changed. We cannot bring back the past and expect them to have the same value like how we have values. Our children may have different values, but that does not mean that they are less patriotic.
So the way that they exhibit their patriotism may be different. Well, that's something to think about.
Culture has changed.
Culture has changed. All right, well, while we think about that, let's take another quick break and we'll come back. The gauntlet has been thrown and we'll pass the microphone to Tan Sri and see what he has to say. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Merdeka Award Roundtable. We're talking about the Spirit of Merdeka, nurturing visionaries. All right, Tansri, very quickly, let's come to you because there's so much to talk about. And yet, you know, this is it. Everyone says this is a world of science and technology. And I mean, that's the reality of it. You know, it's not that history is not important, but perhaps not as relevant. But yet, how do we know, and this is picking out on something that Dina said before, you know, how do we know where we're going if we're not learning from the past, you know, and we don't know where we're coming from? So what do you have to say to that?
Correct. I would like to correct Professor Harith. He said that the science received attention pretty late. That is not true. Before the war itself, we had one internationally famous doctor, Dr. Wu Lien Te, the world's expert on plague. He was invited by China to serve in China. And then there was Tong So Pak, another one, a physicist invited by China. We had so many Queen scholars, you know, who went to British universities. History, in fact, was not that important in schools. I was a science student. I never did history in school. I turned to history later on because I wanted to play football. And if I had remained a science student, I would have to do lab work until 6 p.m. So I switched.
Right.
And I later on became very interested in history because of my lecturers. So I think we have to balance the two. It is not good to place emphasis on certain disciplines and ignore the others. For example, the schools took out geography at one time, and that was disastrous. The children of today don't know anything about the world. You mention Cuba and they will be blinking. So education, again, is most crucial. Therefore, nation building too depends on that. Our Malaysians today cannot distinguish between nationality and ethnicity.
Okay, then let me come very quickly. You know, you've been quoted as saying, to build a nation, you must first build a school. And I'm thinking here, you know, what kind of education are we talking about? Something perhaps a little bit more rounded, as you say. You can't just say, well, away with this discipline, we don't need this, away with that. We've got to have something which is more rounded. Do you think we're moving away from that there's been too much focus on one thing or the other, but not enough of a holistic approach?
We're talking about examinations all the time and high marks in the exams. Whereas when I was in school, we used to look down on people who paid attention only to exams. We call them muggers. You know?
Muggers.
And they were not the heroes in school.
Right. So who are the heroes?
The sportsmen.
I was going to say, the footballer.
Yes.
Right.
Because they help the school to build up the name of the school, you see?
Yeah.
And then I remember one match between my school and another school in Ipoh where we charged, you know, the spectators.
To watch the match. And they paid.
And 3,000 of them turned up.
Wow.
Yeah. You can't do that now, is it?
Yeah, it reminds me of something like along the lines of Tengku Abdul Rahman when you know when he was serving in the civil service. You know, people didn't want to give him money. He says, "Oh, fine, I'll talk to the people of the area and we'll raise funds to do it ourselves." And in terms of being forward-thinking, how do you see Malaysian leaders ranking? And I'm saying this is across the board. We're not just talking about politicians, but on corporate, NGOs, even because you deal with them as well. You know, what's happening here?
I think one of the things, if you really look recent past of, you look at economic meltdown and all, I think leadership has reached an inflection point. Inflection point, the basic values of leadership, if you look at integrity, visioning, remains the same, whether generations before until today. And one of the studies of perspective when we really looked today, I did some studies in India and China. One of the things that differentiated Western leadership and Indian CEO, massive research we did, we found that the outstanding Indian CEOs or leaders